Thank you very much to Noel, Mary, and to Mark, and of course Alistair for arranging the evening with us. Um, I'm delighted to be here, and as Mark says, I guess the reason I've been invited to share in this dialogue and conversation with you, particularly after announcements of the last few days, is to look hopefully at the onward journey, which I'm really keen to plant some seeds for. Similar to the conversations that have already happened, I haven't had a Barney with anybody yet, but that may come, Mark. Um, Certainly, I'm very much an advocate for teachers, and as recent as last summer, when asked by government to give some evidence in relation to what's working, in my opinion, as a practitioner in this area, and I am a teacher first and a technologist second, similar to Noel. I'm keen to say this is about good pedagogy, good teaching and learning. And so I want to just share some of my experience with you, but also share in the conversation with you about the future and how we can take some of this rich learning, albeit under the lens of a crisis, how we can take it forward. I have a few slides, but I also want to, similar to Noel, to share some of the rich outcomes that have come from working with teachers in Northern Ireland. I've got a post-primary example and also a primary example. And just to give you a feel for the types of things that teachers have been doing. And that really is, as Mark said earlier, to bring it alive so that you can see, not that you need to see, if you're working in schools, you will be seeing this every day, I have no doubt, with your colleagues. The crisis of the pandemic has brought blended learning to the fore, but blended learning is something that I have been involved in for a long, long time. And so, whilst I am here to talk about the pandemic and the crisis and how that has brought things to the fore for us, it's also about recognising that blended learning is a quality pedagogy. And often, when you look at things through the lens of any crisis, not least this global crisis that we've all found ourselves in, we tend to sometimes get caught up in the crisis, and it has brought some negative press, if you like, or negative feelings from parents, from schools, and indeed even from pupils about our pedagogy. And we really need to resolve on that. Blended learning is not a negative pedagogy. We just happen to have got caught in a crisis. And one of the things that I am always keen to share with any colleagues and co-professionals or education professionals here this evening and beyond is that there really isn't that much different. You might not agree, but there isn't that much different between a lesson online and I suppose actively engaging your students or pupils as there is face to face. And so the first thing I want to really explore and open up the conversation about this evening, if it's helpful, is what is blended learning? Because people are looking at things through this crisis lens. And I put on screen the very important thing to remember from, certainly from the experience I've had of working with almost 1,000 practitioners, as Mark has said, since last March, as they were tackling this crisis. And that is that blended learning is not homework online. It's not content being placed online in a content repository. It's certainly not something that is gapped in terms of distance from the teacher. The teacher should be very present online. And of course, there's where we got caught out in terms of COVID. Many teachers had not, unfortunately, had adequate time to prepare. And we'll all have an opinion on that in different regions and indeed even across the globe. That's not just something that has happened here in Northern Ireland or indeed GB. That is something that has caught many regions and nations out. Teacher presence online is very doable, but of course there's a set of skills associated with that. And sadly, From last March, when we first had this difficult situation put upon us, many teachers had not had the adequate training. And one thing I would say, following on and indeed repeating what Noel has already said, is that teachers need upskilled. And just because we're going back to school doesn't mean, and hopefully we all want to go back to school, and of course sooner rather than later, when it's safe to do so, it doesn't mean that teachers are in a position where they don't need these skills. They do need these skills. They probably need them even more than they did in the past, because there is now a very different normality. There are many pupils, particularly senior parts and exam classes in post-primary, where it's now the new norm. It's the expectation, and we want to strive for that. We want a digital strategy in Northern Ireland, and I know colleagues in DE and EA are working in this area, and indeed DFE for our further and higher education sectors as well. That digital strategy, we've heard about it for the last half a century, but we have got caught out. So we need to really put the magnifying glass on that. The challenges of remote learning are really being, I suppose, illuminated. And some of you have already mentioned them: poverty, disadvantage, and of course some of the social cohesion debates that surround education, indeed surround health, and surround many of the various areas that are interwoven in our communities. And of course, remote learning has really magnified that for us as a significant problem. And we don't want to ignore that. We realise that there are gaps in this area. And what I would suggest to anybody listening in here, co-professionals this evening, is that if we get blended learning right moving forward, beyond this pandemic, there is an opportunity to reach learners that perhaps will bridge some of those gaps even more. And I'm not suggesting we would replace warm-blooded face-to-face teaching. Of course, we all want that, but the technology can reach learners that perhaps we weren't reaching in the past, and it'll give us an opportunity to, in many ways, give some opportunities for gaps to be filled. So we need to think about remote learning differently. There is a synchronous and an asynchronous nature to blended learning. At Stranmillis, when we first ventured into this work, we designed a course to focus on these two particular things to try and assist teachers, and that has reaped rewards. Many teachers in Northern Ireland, and forums like BlendEd, NI, and of course the very popular, nearly 20,000 members now, Northern Ireland Teachers Collaborate Forum, have all started major conversations around live and pre-recorded lessons, or what's known in the trade or craft as blended synchronous and blended asynchronous teaching and learning. And there lies the challenge. Noel has highlighted even the power of the teacher's voice or the narrative over some of this, and being present with students and pupils online as well as from a distance. So the big focus in our blended learning course to support teachers was how to support the live lesson. Not all schools have signed up to that, understandably. Until your staff are trained and ready to work in this area, we wouldn't be promoting that. But certainly once skills are developed in this area through continuing professional development, there is a space for quality live lessons. There's also a space for pre-recorded support, particularly where there has been either disadvantage or gaps in learning, and we need to support that as well. So blended learning now, as we start to look back towards school and a proper timetable and a proper strategy for going forward, and hopefully soon without a pandemic cloud, there is an opportunity. And rather than seeing it as the risk of no contact, seeing it as something that can scaffold us back to school and support this transition, and what was referred to just a wee while ago as recovery. Accessibility, of course, needs to be worked out. Not all teachers, not all pupils, not just in the rural community. I live in the rural community myself, have access, but indeed some of them still don't have the right access. Some of them are still using machines that are out of date, software that's out of date, and that includes their teaching staff. And there lies a serious problem for this element of accessibility. So we do need to sort that out. I would also call upon members here, and indeed anybody who is lobbying in this area, including some of our government colleagues, to remember that we are using a free platform in schools in Northern Ireland. Noel has just mentioned Microsoft Teams, and you'll know that lots of colleagues are using that, and they're also using the very popular Google Classroom. Google Classroom is free, and when you use platforms that are free, you don't get the best resources. I've made recommendations already to government around this, and I'm calling on colleagues to certainly sort that out going forward, so that our teachers have increasing access, but also they have the best tools moving forward. CPD for teachers has to be looked at, and it's not just, as Noel himself, as a senior practitioner in post-primary, has highlighted, it is not just the tools. In fact, the tools come second. It's the pedagogy. It's how to teach online, how to teach from a hybrid point of view when we go back to school, and how to really access some of these tools in support of good teaching and learning. Inevitably, we have to be secure, we have to feel safe to do so, and we also have to help socialise our children and young people as they transition into this digital world. They are probably very well equipped returning to school, but there is a significant gap. There are still children mentioned already, up to 40% in some regions in Northern Ireland. It's higher than that. The Iliad report has highlighted up to 50% where there's a gap in terms of child poverty. So we need to think about digital awareness, but we also need to give the skills to support that. We can't assume our young people have these skills just because they're text messaging and using different mobile devices. Digital literacy is the future. 2030 and OECD reports have been calling for this for many, many years. They've been calling for it before the pandemic. And so we have to listen, and we have to take some pride in certainly the great work that has started, sadly drawn out of our education system as a result of a crisis. But going forward, that presents an opportunity. So taking it forward, we should not be leaving blended learning behind. We certainly don't want to go back to remote and distance education, but there is space here for digital literacy to come to the fore. And I hope that that certainly is something that we all live through. The barriers remain, and those barriers, as you can see, are vast. This is even pre-pandemic. We've just illuminated them even more as a direct result, I would say, of the crisis that we found ourselves in from last March. There are systems barriers. We still don't have good Wi-Fi in all regions. Inside of school, outside of school barriers, we need to think about that. Home barriers, and of course the intergenerational nature of educational disadvantage still there. And of course we need to take some of the case study work that has come out of that Iliad report and recognise the engagement strategies that will help us resolve in some of these areas. Societal barriers remain. They are linked directly to underachievement, and again they are in a crisis situation now that we have this pandemic, and we need to again socialise our young learners back into school using some of these recommendations. The way forward, if it's useful, and certainly from talking to teachers during my time from last March, is to focus on the well-being of young people and the well-being of teachers, I would say as well. Teachers have been in crisis They've done a sterling job. I would agree with that from colleagues who've spoken earlier, but certainly they need support in moving forward. Dealing with this transition period is going to be a challenge. One thing I would ask for on behalf of any teachers that I have spoken to and spoken with recently, and particularly through the CPD courses that we've run in support of this outreach period, is that we don't rush into assessments too quickly. I know we're hearing those messages at the moment coming out from colleagues, but there is a huge risk to that. Rushing back to record, rushing back to do examinations or to get some evidence for predicted grading is a huge, huge risk. And it's a risk that will widen this disadvantage gap even further. Use blended learning, it's here to stay. Let's find a way. I'd recommend strongly that we get a policy on this, and our digital strategy is aligned to this for all sectors. It will be different for different age groups. There is a capability divide. Our teachers don't all have these skills. That's why we've got such variance. Our pupils don't all have these skills, and certainly our parents may, in some communities, be left behind. So we need to bring them with us on this journey. And parental engagement in this, particularly for younger learners or even young junior post-primary learners, is a particular area that we need to focus on. That's what's going to drive up the resilience of our education community, and that's what's going to get us through this. But most importantly, that's what's going to help us to refocus on what's important, which is teaching and learning over assessment. And so blended learning at Stranmillis will continue. We continue currently to offer some of these courses. Initially, they were offered through our outreach program from March last year. When we pushed out the recommendation of this course, we had overnight almost 1,000 applicants. So that'll tell you how hungry our teaching community were for this level of support. We've now got a new upskilling program. It's called the Upskill program, where we're offering support from our alumni on the course. It's not just our academic staff at Stranmillis. We've now brought in some of that good practice that has come from previous cohorts, cohorts in the primary sector and cohorts in the post-primary sector. And we're very keen to disseminate that learning through our alumni. I want to share with you, just if I may, Mark, some of that learning, which is rich, just to give you a sense of the type of thing that has come out of the course. On your screen at the minute, you'll see our blended learning course. We try to model good practice multimedia online. So everything is video based. This is our blended learning course currently running at the moment. We have lots of tools and lots of ways in which we communicate. We've everything built into one environment, and that's something, that experience of learning as a practitioner through a virtual learning environment really illuminates some of the challenges of some of the other tools and platforms that are out there. And teachers realize very quickly that there are other ways of doing this. As a direct result, we have two exemplars here that I want to share with you. One, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, is from Karen from our Northern Ireland Teachers Collaborate. Karen completed the blended learning course with us. And this is an example of post-primary. And just to give you a sense, she's using video now to support her classroom. She's using Google Forms, similar to what Noel talked about on Microsoft Teams. And she's got lots and lots of materials up and running and ready to launch. This is just a blank area without any students from a GDPR point of view. So very, very easy way through the course of building a platform and of course developing some virtual learning. We also have a primary example, and you'll see the date. I've gone back, put the clock back just slightly to let you see during lockdown how we supported some of the schools in Northern Ireland. This is a graduate of Stranmillis, Ms. Mullally, who is working still in the area of Seesaw. And you'll see that she's put together some great packs. This was during the first lockdown, and this was the type of thing that she put together to support some primary learners. But one of the things that became very important was the use of video technology. And so two teachers on our course, Miss Mullally and Miss Savage, whilst they had lots of packs and lots of resources and lots of activities for children to celebrate their learning and to share in that experience. And that's her Padlet page there, just showing the reward of all of that great work that went on. What you'll see is that it took video technology, it took that level of time out to support some of these technical skills. And of course, depending on the level of the learning, you'll get all sorts of different things that you can do. There's a flip book, there's video lessons, and so on. So it really did reap rewards for us on the Stranmillis course, and they're rewards that we're really keen to share going forward. My advice, for what it's worth, is let's start sharing. And our CPD courses now at Stranmillis are all about bringing these practitioners back to the fore with us. And I go back to that initial slide, which is teacher presence. We are an education community that are good at sharing in Northern Ireland, and it's now time to start that sharing.